Newman, and this is Mr. Media. And today we're very pleased to welcome Isaac Shapiro back again for another interview. Welcome, Isaac.
Thanks.
I have been coming to your satsang now for just 3 weeks. You've had 3 weeks so far, 1 more week to go. And it's certainly been an important event for me here. And so I'm very pleased that this is my first interview with someone I can really appreciate.
Oh, good.
Satsang. Perhaps we should explain what that is to begin with. I believe you define it as meeting with truth. Is that?
Yes, because Sat means truth, and the way truth is used in this context is that which doesn't change. Normally when people speak about truth, there's a disagreement about what the word actually means. So just to define it as that which doesn't change.
Right.
So normally when people speak about what's real, in the dictionary they speak about what exists as being what's real.
What you can define through experiment, through experience.
Yes, anything that's existing, that has existence in time and space. That's what's the definition in the dictionary of what's real. The sages and the saints speak about what's real as that which is unchanging, the substratum on which everything is, of which everything is made up.
Mm-hmm.
That which doesn't change. So there's a different definition there. So Sat is that which does not change, truth, which is already here now. And Sang means meeting with truth or association with truth. And many people use the word satsang. There's musical satsangs and all this different kind of thing that people have. Ultimately, no matter which path you're on, you come to a point where you have to see who you are.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other way. So,
just to get back to the satsang, because I'm an old sannyasin, and we had satsang with Bhagwan, or Osho,
yes,
as he called himself later, which was a meeting with the master, a meeting with the commune, and a meeting with the truth and the Buddha nature.
Yes.
And here you define it more in terms of the meeting of the truth, in terms of the substance of reality as opposed to its form. Is that
Yes.
right? So,
Yes.
and this I notice within your satsangs that you almost, your dialogues, if I can call them that, have a sort of platonic feel about them. They solely unrealize the outer reality for the person and take them inwards to this point of having dropped every other association or with the external reality, to
Yes.
leave them stripped to
Yes.
an essence of awareness.
Yes. It's funny to speak this way because it is really getting naked, you see, getting naked of all your preconceptions, all your beliefs of past and of future, and coming to this moment naked. And it sounds different than it actually is experienced, because the actual experience of it is beauty, love, bliss. But when you speak of being stripped or naked, then people get scared, you see. So it's one way to speak. What to do with it, you see.
Can you explain why it is that the experience is one of love, bliss, of these qualities? Because looking at it, if you just strip away and you end up with nothing or no
Yes.
thing, I'm not sure which would be a more appropriate word to use, why is it that that is associated with these feelings? Because in a way you're trying to strip people. If someone expresses a feeling within satsang, you say, yes, but who's feeling? You
Who's
even would,
aware of
even
it,
if they're
yes.
saying, I feel love,
Yes.
I feel bliss.
Yes.
Yes. Still
Okay.
there's one step backwards, is that
Yes.
right?
So this is a very good question, actually. And I watched a tape of Nisargadatta where he spoke about this. He spoke that the truth is that there's nothing, yet my experience is that I'm everything. So once a person recognizes by looking into themselves and really looking for this I that we suppose exists, and coming to the point of just recognizing that they're awareness itself, consciousness itself. But recognizing it not intellectually, but as a direct experience. At this point, there's the experience of being nothing, and, strangely enough, also being everything. Meaning that there's no feeling of boundary, that everything that's appearing is appearing in you. So this, once everything's appearing in you, then this is the sense of non-separation. So non-separation, the actual experience of non-separation is love. Not romantic love as we know it, but this feeling of being one, which actually is what all romantic love is about, is to try to become one with somebody. So this love is a natural, you could say the natural state.
Right. And it's an openness. It's
a
not a desire,
yeah,
it's not a seeking.
Correct.
Because it's an experience of realization of oneness, as
Correct.
opposed to the desire for oneness.
Correct. And then in this, there's a profound relaxation.
Mhm.
So what happens is the body, within the body, it feels like the cells are dancing or tingling or energy is moving. Many people describe it in different ways.
Mhm.
And again, the mind has to move slightly to register this. And so this is what people call the feeling of bliss. It's a byproduct of this profound relaxation, this sense of, this direct sense of being at one with everything.
Right.
And
I was blessed about 12 years ago to experience this for about a week.
Yes.
After a group where I became a sannyasin at that time.
Yes.
It felt like I was in love with the universe, and
Yes.
the universe was in love with me, and there
Yes.
was just no way this was ever going to stop, because there was
Yes.
no reason for it to stop. You know, somehow it did. It did, because it happened in an instant.
Yes.
And it was to do with a relationship situation. Someone criticized me, and somewhere I fell out of it again, you know. And I've never re-experienced it in that way. I've had various experiences of experiencing this oneness in different ways, and it's interesting that the mind can experience it in many different ways.
Yes.
This being in love with the universe was one.
Yes.
Another one where I actually experienced it more in a visual thought terms of the whole universe inverting, so that it was inside rather than
Yeah.
outside. This
Yes.
was also associated with an experience of bliss.
Yes.
So there are obviously various different experiences that are possible,
Yes.
depending on your attitude of mind at the time, perhaps, and
Just
how it touches
what's
you.
being revealed, yeah, what's being revealed in that moment. You see, there's a lot of, what you're speaking about is the normal mind process, the normal habit of attention, instead of being focused outward onto our perceptions and our interpretation of them, onto our thoughts and our feelings and the interpretation of them, the mind is for an instant turned in on itself.
Mhm.
And in this instant, there's this experience of being at one with the universe. And then this can reveal in various ways, just like when you have an ocean, the ocean is vast, and there's waves on the surface of the ocean. 5 feet under the ocean, there's a different experience of the ocean.
Mhm.
And 60 meters deep, there's a different experience again. So it's all ocean, and these experiences of melting into the truth of your own being can have different flavors, but ultimately the core of it is this oneness, this lack of any trouble, this sense of
Right.
being at home.
So in a sense, we are a wave, but we are a part of the ocean.
Yes,
as
of
a
course,
whole.
of course.
Okay. Perhaps I'd like to guide us back more to your history of life in a way, just to understand how you came to Papaji, because that would interest me. I mean, you haven't always been practicing satsang, obviously. At some point,
No.
you were drawn to India to go to Papaji. How did that occur?
What had happened for me was that at 19 I had also an experience of I would term it unconditional love. Just some profound experience happened that I can describe aspects of it, but all I can say is that I realized in that moment that this was the truth, and that what I'd been living had been a mere shadow. And in that instant also I saw that I didn't know a single happy person, and that the way my life was geared was bound to keep me caught up in the movie. So I went and resigned from studying medicine and decided that I wanted to be free. But it was difficult because I was living in South Africa at the time, and up to that point I hadn't even realized that there was a political problem in South Africa, because in South Africa in those days there was no media that was allowed to cover any opposing viewpoint, and the reality I grew up in was just that's the way things were. I didn't have any reason to question it. And all of a sudden I realized, man, something's going on here that's not of the heart. And so it was a big wake-up call for me, because all of a sudden I started to get involved politically, and also I saw that there was, basically my thinking had been completely along the lines of what my experience had been up to that point, and I could see this is really interesting to try and come out of thinking when my thinking itself is faulty. So anyway, so there was a bunch of confusion at that point also. Sexual freedom, political freedom, all these things were all clumped together as one thing, and a tremendous amount of idealism about what could be possible for people to live and all this thing. And also the tremendous realization, this was in the 60s, that what was happening on the planet was that it was kind of like Nero fiddling while Rome was burning. In that instant I realized what trouble we were on the planet. I had not realized up to that point. And most people had not even thought in those days of the environment or the monetary system and all these things that now the experts are telling us is quite in deep trouble. And all of a sudden I realized, wow, something has to happen. We can't go on like this. So that was how my search started, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So I think like many people I got this idea of living simply in the country and being back to tribal roots and trying to live as a community, because I could see that what had happened from the Industrial Revolution and living in cities was not conducive to children being raised in a healthy way, or mothers being able to have a decent connection with their kids, and that people, by force of circumstance, and just to make a living, and by force of their own conditioning about what they needed for life, were thrust into a way of living that just perpetuated the whole thing.
So you left South Africa at that moment? Or?
So I left South Africa about a year later.
Mm-hmm.
It took me about a year to get it together. And I wanted to actually learn about community living. So I went to a kibbutz, and then I started to realize I'd been a city boy. I started to see how much poison we were using on our vegetables and all of this, and I saw what had been confirmed in that moment, what was going on in terms of how we were treating the planet and all this.
Right.
But this is kind of diverging in a long way. But to cut a long story short, I was really keen to come out of the suffering, and it was the most prominent thing on my mind. And it ended up where I had spent literally hundreds of hours looking at what is the mind, what are the basic building blocks of my personality, how does it all function, what's a decision, what's an attitude, what's a belief, what's an emotion, how do they tie together, how does this result in my personality, my whole thing, you see, and wanting very much to develop a way to communicate this with people so that I could be of some benefit to people. And
So this was a self. You did this by yourself, or
I did
have
this
you
by
read books
I did this by myself, and I also met other people who had similar interests, and we lived together and would spend all our time basically thinking about this and looking at it. And
This was in Israel.
no, this was
Afterwards.
actually afterwards. This was
All right.
this was I moved to New Zealand and started the community there, and then was traveling backwards and forwards between New Zealand and California, and I met different people and who had similar interests, and we spent time doing this. And then, as life went on, I started to work with people, first individually, and even though I could show people the building blocks of their whole personality, somehow I didn't feel satisfied with it. I knew intellectually that I was that which was unchanging, that I was the source of everything. I knew it, you see, and I knew that all the drama that was going on was just my own play. I could say that it wasn't real, but still it seemed real. And still I was having trouble with my girlfriend or my wife, whatever was happening at that time, and still trying to break through the veil or something like this. You see, there were some misconceptions happening still in my psyche. And at that point I became aware of, through meeting another man, about how attention functions. So that, for example, if someone looks at you and they are judging you, that it actually has an effect on your body-mind. And I started to see the different energy lines that were going around, and basically it was a big wake-up call to see how much people were judging and having opinions of each other, and that this was just considered normal and everybody was doing it. And in that, there was so much experiential discomfort that people were kind of doing what they could to get away from their experience into just living in a mental realm, basically, and just going more and more into the mind to get away from the actual experience of discomfort, getting themselves very busy and with all kinds of nonsense, basically, just to avoid feeling what they were feeling. And so I started working with people, just showing them how they were using their attention. And the work was very strong and powerful and was quite successful. And my idea was that in business, when within a business you have a secretary who has an opinion about a boss, that this ends up costing the company actually a lot of money every year. Or if the guy who's filling the orders doesn't like the salesman, or whatever the thing is that's going on, that not only in days of sickness that actually result from this kind of activity, but just in terms of productivity, and you could call not intentional sabotage, that it ended up costing every company lots of money.
So we're all affecting each other in the way we express ourselves, the way we are, by other people's thoughts. I mean, they are affecting the way we work, our ability to operate as a group.
Of course.
So
and I mean, even down to the way men and women relate. You know, there's a lot of people have this idea of wanting this perfect partner that they're going to get involved in, and then of course it never works out that way. So people have always got playing the attraction game. Oh, this one might be better for me, and that one might be better for me, but it's never spoken. It's just kind of played out, you see. And so again, there's some in this attraction game. You know, there's an unacknowledged attraction going on. Some woman will come along that might be attracted to you, and you're attracted to her, and you don't speak about it, and your wife can feel it. She knows, of course she knows it, but she doesn't say anything, and she's got her attractions going with other men, and you can feel it, so you're insecure. And so this whole thing gets played out, and the kids basically get battered in it.
Yep.
And it's what it's what everybody's living in and trying to come out of. But as it's going on, people don't see their way out of it, and they try to change each other and all this
Seeking
other
the easy way out to achieve the sense of
yeah.
peace, certainty,
Correct.
which is
Yes.
the way you say, which is through satsang, which is coming into the truth of one's center,
Self, yeah.
which is to form a new foundation for
I'd
a
say
way
not
of
even,
of
it's not
being.
even to form a new foundation, it's actually to
realize.
coming to that which is already real.
Mhm.
All of the rest of this basically is a result of our attention being on our experience, or our attention being on our thoughts and feelings.
Because it seems to me that as animals that have evolved, our conscious mind is actually an aspect of our unconscious mind, which is there to work on those things that confuse the unconscious. So I mean, basically, we operate in the real world. We don't have to think about the way we drive or anything, the normal everyday actions, because we've worked out how to do them.
Yes.
So they don't take up our conscious mind. The only things that actually interfere or actually come into our conscious mind are those things that the unconscious is unsure about. And from a perspective of evolution, the unconscious mind is concerned with defense, reproduction, and the basic animal. Which this is looking at from an animalistic point of view, from an evolutionary point of view, as a material being.
And to say it another way is basically our relationship to everything.
Mm-hmm.
So this, what we call our relationship to everything, goes on all the time. There's this aspect of the mind that's always analyzing everything.
Mm-hmm.
Do I like this? Don't I like this?
Judging.
Is this good for me or not good for me?
Right.
This process is going on all the time.
In Western mysticism,
Mm-hmm.
it's very the basis of it seems to go back to an idea of that the universe is mental. I'm thinking of the Hermetic tradition, Hermes Trismegistum, and which forms a very big basis of which Western mysticism, which I'm sure you're very aware of.
I'm happy to come back to this, but I realised that we didn't. You asked me about how did I meet
Papaji.
How did I meet Papaji? So let's finish this and we come back to this thing.
All right.
Okay. So anyway, I was working around the world, and I met a friend of mine who'd come to one of my workshops, and something very beautiful had happened to him, because I was very energetically aware, and I could see that something had happened to him where he was grounded in himself in a very lovely way. And so I asked him. At first I thought it was because of the work he'd done with me, and he said no, he'd met this man called Papaji. And so I spoke to him a little while, and I'd actually been anti-guru at that point, because I'd seen the phenomena of people getting involved with gurus, and in my opinion at that time, it seemed that most of the relationships were not very mature, that what happened was people were just getting involved in a way of giving their power away, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else was going to take care of it. They were involved in this great big new adventure, this love affair with a guru, and for me it seemed like most people were losing perspective in it.
So the guru took over the parental position.
The parental position, and people were willing to let all kinds of things happen to them in the name of, this is the guru's device, or whatever the thing is. This happened, from my perspective, a lot around Osho. And I see it differently now also. This was just my perspective at that time.
Because you could see it as a way of surrendering to the experience, whatever that is. And the master will always reflect what you need and what you're expecting. So
correct. So we can have as many viewpoints as we like about everything.
Right.
Ultimately, no viewpoint is the truth. So.
And also about someone like Osho, who one could
was very controversial.
Well, we wouldn't want to even start trying to judge or to pigeonhole in that way.
Clearly, so.
Okay. But back to Papaji, sorry.
Back to. So at that time, I was not interested in the guru, but I was actually interested in meeting somebody who had been interested in truth for so many years, and who had had such a profound effect on a friend of mine. So I went to go and see him, and he blew all my conceptions of a guru out of the water because he was so ordinary and in those days so available. I mean, I sat down and had lunch with him at his table, yeah? And we were talking and joking, basically. And as he was working with people, I was seeing things that I couldn't hold in any way in my mind. But clearly something was happening to almost everybody that was there. And I couldn't see a cause and effect thing happening with it. It was out of, these things were happening, and everyone was enjoying, and there was no way to contextualize it.
Can you explain it now? Because I'm aware of this in the satsangs that you give, and also in the experience outside the satsangs, that my mind quiets down. I can sit on my veranda and listen to Led Zeppelin, and suddenly, bang, there I am. It does alter the way we are, just to be sitting together with you. And
yes.
So there's something happening which is not spoken, which is not experienced.
Correct.
Can you explain that a bit more now than you could then? I mean, is that...
Well, the only explanation really is grace.
Mm-hmm.
See, there is not cause and effect. In those days I was thinking of myself as someone and someone else as someone. So then, from this perspective, there's someone doing something that affects someone else. That was my thinking at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Papaji doesn't have that experience. He's everyone, everywhere. And he just is living as that. So somebody comes into that field, and for no reason that you can see, suddenly they light up like a Christmas tree.
Mm-hmm.
And they're that also. They see that they're that. And Papaji's just laughing with them and enjoying them. And I mean...
So what you're saying is, I mean, sorry, I keep on interrupting you, but I'm just trying to clarify, because this is something that I have difficulty with. I mean, it's all very well experiencing the oneness, and I'm very, it's okay, I've had that beautiful experience, and
yes,
I want it again, when you know, and the wanting stops, of course, it happening. But it's another trick. But I was trying to comprehend this idea, because when other people get involved, then that's complex, because then you're dealing with their, you know, that you respect their that they are, you know, and in a way, I was trying to understand this last night and thinking about it, and it was almost, the only way I could think of it was like, there is only one person who's living
yes.
all the lives through all time,
yes.
backwards and forwards, as it were, you know, like
yes.
and through the different experiences takes on different personalities and different outward expression. But
yes.
ultimately, it's all one being,
yes.
with one intelligence.
Yes, so, and another way of speaking about the same thing, it's like, you know, if you take a guitar,
Mm-hmm.
it has 6 strings on it, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And each string looks like a separate string. And you vibrate one string, and then the other strings start to vibrate.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you only vibrated the one string. Somehow the other strings start to vibrate. There's something that we call sound that we can't see, we can hear it. But this sound is traveling in waves, and these waves start to vibrate the other strings, you see? So when someone's mind is quiet, again, I don't know what...
It's I was saying infectious is perhaps the wrong way of describing it, but
yeah.
it does seem to
open the space.
We learn at some level how to calm, how to drop those...
Yes, the other minds seem to come into sync with that, you see, and then all of a sudden you're talking about something quite mundane and somebody starts to laugh and just laugh and because they see the joke all of a sudden that they just couldn't see while their mind was running. So it's not a doing, it's exactly the opposite of doing. You know, you're not sitting there putting golden light on anybody or trying to change them or pump them up or anything. You're just sitting there keeping quiet yourself, and suddenly something happens. And, you know, it's like again, it's very visible when it does happen if you're actually looking at it, but there's some way inside of my own being that I can feel it when it happens, even when I'm not looking at anybody. There's it's strange, it's not a sense, it's just a knowing. And so beautiful, so beautiful.
Right.
So.
Well, it is, and it's very present. I mean, at this moment, I'm not in it because I'm thinking like crazy about the next question and how I want to include certain things within the interview. So it's also fun to be with you in this way, because normally I would just be wanting to melt into that right now. But I did want to ask you a couple of important questions.
And at the same time, this melting is here, you see.
Yeah, it is.
It's
I mean, I feel that warmth anyway.
It's underneath everything. So
it's a sense of trust, which I think is essential to the whole process. This perhaps which is behind this loving and this openness, there has to be trust. It's something that I learned a few years ago, actually, when I was doing some relationship counselling. I was being counselled for my relationship, and someone said, well, either you trust or you don't trust. You know, you've got to decide. Because I mean, you've got to see that it isn't that you can trust one person and not another. Either there is trust in your heart or there isn't.
Yes.
And it has to start with trust of the self.
Yes.
And a feeling of being at ease.
Well, this is the whole thing again, you know, because again, you know, if you try and trust somebody, it doesn't work, yeah? It doesn't work. If I sit here and I'm going to try and trust you, that's not going to work.
If you're trying, you're probably fighting some unconscious realization in yourself that actually.
But once you touch that oneness, then it's like trust automatically is there, because what else can there be? You see?
Yeah.
It's just
otherwise, it'd be like hurting oneself.
Yes,
hurt
of
the
course.
other. That's the point.
Yeah.
I wanted to quickly, just because I know we don't have a very long time at this moment, I wanted to touch on certain aspects, because I know you wouldn't, I think, classify your work as religious.
No, it's not religious.
But I wanted to ask you about your perception of the mind in relation to reincarnation, and the aspect, the concept of the being, living, dying, being reborn, going on to existence on another plane, and how this fits in with your experience of the essential beingness, awareness. Is this no thing, this experience which people have of truth within the satsang, is that the experience of their true nature with which they then go on to experience after death? Or is there also something else? Or would you rather not?
Well, you see, I can try and speak of this as best as I know at this point. In every one of us, at a DNA level, is the history of all of life up to this point. So our tendency is that we feel at this point as individuals. This ability to feel individual actually came about, as far as I can see, around 12,000 years ago. By that I mean that it's a highly developed and a fairly fresh development in consciousness, the sense of individuality. Mm-hmm. So from my perspective, I would say that there's not someone that reincarnates. Mm-hmm. I say that at this point, there's, as you were speaking earlier, there's consciousness, which is in everything, in everyone. It's the substratum of everything. So some people call this God, some people call this energy, some people call this awareness, consciousness. But whatever the energy is in every atom, in every every life form, this life itself, yeah? This energy, it's not individualized, and it never has been. Mm-hmm. Like the wave on an ocean. Can you say that one particular wave is going to reincarnate as another wave someplace? Mm. The ocean, the wave comes on the ocean, and it is ocean even as it's wave, you see, and then it's back in the ocean again. And then another wave will form, and this wave, in a certain sense, has the memory of every wave that's ever been, and is again appearing on the surface of the ocean. But it's not an individual wave. It never was. It never can be, you see. Okay,
so to perceive the idea of an individual soul, as it were, which reincarnates and develops.
This is a very modern idea. This idea of soul. I mean, I haven't tracked back to where the idea of soul came, but this is certainly not very old.
So it's not so much about an individual person with a sense of I that continues through, and after every life really realizes its experiences in a long line. You say that it's a universal whole, and that at death we come back to re-experience the whole again, and then we dive back in,
Yeah.
and we have no memory of our past lives. Although people do have memories, that is just
But again, you
tuning
see,
into the general memory.
I would say that's tuning into the general mind, you see, because there's only one mind. It's almost like there's no personal thought. I mean, this again you can experience. You know, we say, I'm thinking.
Mhm.
But then look and see what's actually happening. Just like we say, I'm breathing, and this is easier to see with breath. You look for the eye that's breathing, there's nobody breathing. This breathing's just happening.
Right.
And the same thing with thinking. We say, I'm thinking, but actually in our direct experience, thinking is happening, and then we become aware of this thinking. Sometimes thinking is happening and we're not even aware of it.
Right. Well, of course, that was the basis of Descartes' theories and set off a whole change in the philosophy of the West and our approach now, which can be seen in the way we treat nature and the world and ourselves.
Yeah.
But
So also I want to say that when I was doing groups, I started to see this phenomena. I would notice that some thought would come in my mind, and I would just check and say, look, just take a moment to get what thought is in your mind at this moment. Then I'd ask anyone in the room to say, what is the thought that's in your mind right now? And someone would say it, and I'd say, how many people were having this thought? And usually about 90% of the people in the room were having the thought. And I would say, how many of you thought it was your thought? And again, 90% of the people thought it was their thought.
Mhm.
And the same thing as we started to check with sensations. I'd have people come in, people that had never done this work before, didn't know what I was aiming at. Just to them, they're coming in fresh off the street. Say, okay, good, sit down.
Mhm.
Check in your body now. What the sensations in your toes and your feet and your legs. Just get a sense. Do an overall imprint of the sensations. Now, anybody stand up and speak them, you see.
Mhm.
And the person would go, and I'd say, how many people recognize these sensations as what you're experiencing? 90% of the people again. Okay, how many of you thought it was yours? So I started to see that what's going on is it's almost kind of like this universal mind that's moving everything.
Mhm.
And people seem to be going, also if you check in your own experience, people seem to be going through the same things or the same issues at different times.
So in a way, it's
So
only
people speak about this as planetary influences or who knows what, you see.
it's only our association with the past which defines the separateness of our experiences in the present.
I would say.
Otherwise, we'd be experiencing exactly the same thing. It's only because, well, of course, we associate with the body, and therefore we position ourselves differently in space at this
yeah.
moment. But if we could completely drop the past in this moment and stop talking and just enter the present,
Yes.
we would be there together, and there would be no division.
Of course.
And I also see that often in satsang, I've been having an idea, I walk through the door, and you're saying exactly that, like about Led Zeppelin. I've just been listening to it, and I have to laugh. And I saw this also with Osher. In my experiences with him
The
and with other people,
synchronicity,
the
yeah.
synchronicity, the sharing of thought, this is another level. So basically you're coming to the idea of a totally impersonal self, in a way, because we are all one,
Yes.
which means dropping the sense of ego, the sense of being special, the sense
Yes.
of continuation.
Yes.
And this is, in a way, it's scary to the ego.
Yes.
It's against everything we perceive of in our reality at this time on the earth.
Yes.
And it leaves me with not much time to ask you about the question of what is the purpose of the earth? Is it just to merely experience this experience of reality, or is it constructed by the mind of the universal mind for a purpose, or is it just an accident? I mean, what are your views? Do you have a view on that? Do you even...
Well, you know, again, we can say mankind happened from this. Dinosaurs were around for 200 million years, and all of a sudden something happened, and all these dinosaurs were found with still chewing, you see, these skeletons of dinosaurs. And then man evolved, and thinking about thinking, and this whole thing now that's now here. And this is only about 2 million years old. Now, and who knows what the next step is? You see,
The next dream.
The next dream, basically. Whether we're going to all wake up and telepathy is going to become commonplace, and in actuality functioning as one organism in another way that we've never dreamed was possible. Just like cells kind of combined from bacteria, and life forms developed to become more complex life forms until we now have mankind and a pretty amazing system
Right.
that's functioning in our bodies of interrelated cells and specialized cell activity that developed just from bacteria. Who knows what can happen next in terms of, you know, people waking up and functioning as one heart, one being, you see. We don't know.
So we are one being involved in an experiment of realizing the finite, of relating to ourselves through an infinite variable complex, which is an amazing idea, an amazing creation. We must be brilliant.
It's phenomenal, actually. And so, I mean, to me, it's highly exciting just to see what happens next. I mean, I'm really interested to see this thing. What's going to happen? Who would have ever imagined it would turn out like this?
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Well, thank you very much for coming here and talking again, telling something about your life as well, which was interesting, and being prepared to discuss all these mind games that I brought forward. And it's been really beautiful. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you also. Namaskar. Om.